Hello. Today I'm going to talk about a very interesting person, Master Ramchander, who was born almost 200 years ago. And today, when we talk about things like public health, general awareness about science and medicine in the context of disease, particularly in the context of COVID-19, which is going on just now, I think it's good to remember him because he was a person who worked very hard to increase public awareness about science. He was born in 1821 in Panipat. He was actually from a family which belonged to Delhi. His father, Sundar Lal Mathur, was at that point in the revenue service of the East India Company. The East India Company, of course, from 1803 onwards, had been the actual ruler of Delhi and the area around it. And Sundar Lal was in the revenue service. He was a Naib Tehsildar. At that moment, he was posted in Panipat when Ramchander was born. When Ramchander was only 9 years old, his father unfortunately died, and the family, with his mother and her 6 children, they came to Delhi. And his mother really brought them up with a lot of difficulty. And the only benefit was that in those days, the government schools used to give scholarships to children as well. And if you got admission to a government school and you were a good student, you got a scholarship which not only paid, your school education was free, but that scholarship helped you to provide for at least some of your family's financial needs. So that really helped his mother to manage the house because Ramchander was not only going to the school, but he was a good student as well. So that carried on for a while. Ramchander, as used to happen in those days, was also married very young. He married when he was 11. And he had to, after a while, he left schooling for a little while because even with the scholarship, it was difficult. And he took up a job in his teens, came back again and joined what was the Delhi College. Now we need to understand what the Delhi College was. The Delhi College was set up in 1825, and it was the first Western style higher education institution in Delhi. Of course, there had been colleges earlier as well, many different kinds of colleges for a very long time, many centuries in fact. But this was the first Western style college. Now, English classes had also been added by 1827. It had been decided to add English classes as well. The structure of the institution was interesting. There was an Oriental section and an English section. The Oriental section taught 3 languages. You could choose from 3 languages: Arabic, Persian, and Sanskrit. So those were 3 languages that you could choose from as a study of language and literature. But then besides that, you studied a range of subjects. And by the time Ramchander joined the college, the subjects were mostly those which were based on a Western studies curriculum. Western sciences, mathematics, Western political economy, as they used to call it in those days. So these were the kind of subject history that was being taught. Now, the other section of the college was the English section. Here, the language and literature taught was English. And the medium of instruction, the other subjects that were taught were also, again, like in the Oriental section, they were all based on the Western sciences, political economy, history, etc. Whereas in the Oriental section, these were taught through the medium of Urdu. Urdu in those days was the language of the area of Delhi. In fact, there was no great distinction between Hindi and Urdu. We must remember that in those days, even poets like Ghalib, for instance, the language that they call Hindi is what we would today recognize as Urdu. That kind of division has happened in slightly later times. But so whereas in the Oriental College, it was the Indian classical languages that were taught, Arabic, Persian, Sanskrit, and the medium of instruction for the other subjects was Urdu. In English, all this was taught in English. And it was the English section that Ramchander got his education in. He was enrolled in the English section, and he proved to be a very smart student. He was extremely interested in science, particularly mathematics. He was very interested in mathematics, very interested in science, and he picked up English very quickly also. This was a very interesting era in the history of the Delhi College and the cultural history of Delhi. The Delhi College had become a sort of center because of the kind of curriculum it taught for the dissemination of new kinds of knowledge about new technologies, new areas of research and study in the sciences, and all this was was a part of the curriculum. Now, because unlike other places like Calcutta, it had been decided that many of these subjects will be taught in the local language, that is Urdu. What was needed was, of course, adequate textbooks to teach these subjects from. And for that, the project was begun in the Delhi College, which took the form of the Vernacular Translation Society. And this was a society which was formed with the object of taking into hand this project of making enough texts available in Urdu to do with sciences and history and political economy, etc. And it was teachers and students mostly of the Delhi College who were recruited to make these translations. And Master Ramchander, Ramchander was one of the important people who was involved in this. His contribution was great. He did a lot of translations himself. Actually, by the time in 1844, he finished his education. And so he had got his education, and he was immediately employed in the college itself as a teacher of science and mathematics in the Oriental section. He had studied in the English section, but he was employed in the Oriental section. So he was teaching all these sciences and mathematics in the Urdu language. And of course, as I said, he was also taking an important part in the translation project. Now, during this period, he started in 1844, and right around that time, the Delhi College decided to bring out a weekly newspaper. The idea being that it was through the newspaper that a sort of a public forum for the discussion of new subjects. And it was not just news, it was social issues to some extent, history, current affairs that was being talked about in this newspaper. It was called the Kiranu Sadain. Beyond this, in Ramchander, he was called Master Ramchander because he was a master as in a teacher of science and maths in the college. Master Ramchander contributed a lot of articles to the Kiranu Sadain, but he also decided with a few friends to launch one after the other two other periodicals, also two other magazines. One was called the Fawaidun Nazarin, which means for the benefit of the readers, and the other was called Muhibbe-Hind, which means the Indian Patriots. And the idea of both these magazines was quite similar actually to the Kiranu Sadain, except that they did not have so much current affairs, but their aim was to bring subjects of scientific, historical, other kinds of matters of interest to a general public. They realized that Delhi College, while it was teaching all these progressive subjects in the curriculum, these were not reaching out to a general non-student public. So they wanted to spread some of these ideas in the general public as well. And I'm going to just look at some of the subjects that were taught here, and I'm going to tell you about that. He talked about, for instance, the water mill. How does a water mill work? There were biographies of important people like Socrates, Aristotle, Newton, Galileo, all these scientists, philosophers, etc. He talks about the making of magnets, how magnets are made. He talks about steamboats, he talks about the telegraph, he talks about the physics of sound, he talks about light, he talks about the circulation, how the earth rotates and circulates, the solar system. He all sorts of different kinds of, on the science of magic. He talks about, he demystifies magic, that things which are claimed on the basis of magic, this is actually the science behind it, this is how it's done. He did a lot to break up superstition. So many popular superstitions he would, in the pages of the newspaper and in the magazines, were demystified to show that this is a popular belief, but this is the actual reality of it. So he talks about all sorts of things. He talks about eclipses, he talks about earthquakes, many different kinds. One of the essays was on the circulation of the blood. So a lot of scientific knowledge which was there, which was new, was being disseminated to a general reading public through these newspapers. So he did a lot of interesting work in popularizing science. And remember, all these newspapers, all these magazines were in Urdu. Urdu being the language of which was commonly understood. So he was very interested in bringing this scientific knowledge and a scientific temperament among the people of India. He also occasionally talked about social reform, like for instance on the education of women. And as I said, the whole idea of dispelling superstition and pointing out the mistakes among commonly held religious belief, and he tried to dispel that also. So that in fact made him a little controversial, because obviously people didn't like that religious belief was also questioned by him. But he was the ultimate rationalist. He wanted to rationalize everything. And I'll come back to the religious belief in a minute, but before that, one of the things that he did was he did original research in mathematics also. He wrote books, apart from all his translations, he did original research in mathematics. And one of the books of his, his first book, was published in 1850. He published it in Calcutta at his own expense. And so this was a book called A Treatise on Maxima and Minima, and on the problems of maxima and minima. It's quite a well-known book. It was quite breakthrough in some ways, because it did something unusual. I'm not a mathematician, so I may not be able to explain this very well, but as far as I understand it, it dealt with a problem which was in the very new field of calculus. Now, calculus was a field that had developed in the West, and Indians were beginning to hear about it. The problem was that for the Indian education in mathematics, I mean, it was not at all backward, but it was based mainly on algebra. And Bhaskar's Bij Ganit, for instance, had really expounded some of the major points in algebra. And the Indian system was based on this algebraic tradition. So with algebra, if you are experts in algebra, he tried to explain calculus through algebra because Indians were strong in algebra, whereas in the West, algebra was not that strong. It was the ancient traditional education system was more on arithmetic and geometry, and therefore calculus was understood very, very differently. So he tried to explain and to solve some of the problems of calculus through algebra. So in a way, one can look at this also as his as a part of his translation project, because the translation was not only about language. It's not only about translating from one language to another language, from English to Urdu, but it's about translating concepts into educational and learning systems, into knowledge systems that are more intelligible. And it was in a sense some of the fundamentals of how we learn was explored there, because it said that there's more than one way of learning something. There's more than one way of understanding something, and that was what was interesting. Now, unfortunately, his book, when it was published in Calcutta, got a few bad reviews because people didn't understand what he was saying. They said, why bother with solving calculus through algebra? How does it benefit you? I mean, I remember all these reviewers were British people who were reviewing it. So they didn't understand the importance of algebra in the Indian educational system. So that was the complaint that he made. He was very disappointed, but he did meet one or two people who helped him. And one of the names was Bethune, who was an important official at that point, and he actually asked Ramchander to give him 200 copies and to buy them. And he got 200 copies, and out of those copies he gave them not only to his friends in India, but he sent some of them to England. And in England, one of these copies went into the hands of a rather well-known mathematician, Augustine Morgan. Augustine Morgan was teaching in London, and he liked the book. He understood the importance of this book, and he got in touch with Ramchander, which really boosted Ramchander's hopes a little bit, because he had been very disappointed by the reception he had got in Calcutta. He had even gone to Calcutta in 1851 to try and help promote his book among government officials, at least. So he was a little disappointed. So Augustus de Morgan's response was raised some hopes in him. And Augustus de Morgan said, your work is not only good, but I want to publish it in England again. So this was published again in England in 1859. And as I said, it was well received. A lot of people in England really did appreciate it a lot more. In India, his life continued. His career continued pretty much the same. He continued to teach. In the Delhi College, he continued to take part in the translation program and, of course, in the publication of the magazines. But in his personal life, there was a major upheaval, because even at the time that he went to Calcutta in mid-1851, he was already beginning to contemplate conversion to Christianity. It is a little difficult to understand how this had come about. It was not a spur of the moment decision. He thought about it very long. He himself in his memoirs wrote that for a long time he used to question all religion. As I said, even in his writings in his newspapers, he often dismissed a lot of religious belief on the basis that it was not rational. It was not supported by rational thinking. So he had begun to question all religions, his own and as well. So his religious faith, he said he did not have a lot of faith. But slowly, for some reason, he did begin to think, and he read the Bible, not only the Bible, he read a lot of commentaries. He read the religious scriptures of several other religions as well in detail. And he came to the conclusion that Christianity was for him. And in the middle of 1852, he decided to convert. The ceremony of conversion, the conversion was held in St. James's Church, which is near Kashmiri Gate. At the same time, another prominent Delhi person was also converted to Christianity. That was Dr. Chaman Lal. Dr. Chaman Lal was a medical doctor. He was probably the first Delhi person to get a medical degree from the medical college in Calcutta. At that time, Delhi did not have a Western style medical college, so he had got his education there and had been practicing in Delhi since then after his graduation. So he also had decided to convert, and both of them were converted to in St. James's Church in 1852. And that, of course, created a lot of furor in Delhi. A lot of people, and there was a lot of discussion. There was some amount of social ostracism to these two people from their own communities. And so that caused a little bit of upheaval in their lives. As far as Master Ramchander was concerned, yes, he had some friction within his family, but his family really rallied to his support a few years later when the revolt of 1857 broke out. 11th of May 1857 in the morning, you had the soldiers who had mutinied in Meerut the previous day. They arrived in Delhi and the revolt started. And it was not only the soldiers, but a lot of people from the city who joined in the outbreak. And of course, their aim was firstly to try and eliminate all sources of opposition who may sabotage their movement. So they found all British, European people and they killed them. They also, in that category of people who might oppose them, they also put all Indians who were Christians. And Dr. Chaman Lal, who was in his dispensary at that point, he was immediately killed. Ramchander was hidden by his own family. His family rallied around and hid him, finally arranged for him to escape from Delhi. He escaped from Delhi, he went away, he managed, and he had to hide and was in quite a lot of danger for quite a while. Finally, he managed to come to the British camp, which was on the ridge, because by mid-June, the British had come back to Delhi, though not into the city, but they set up their base on the ridge, on the northern ridge. And that is from there, they then carried on this whole, a long so-called siege of Delhi, as it is called, till September. And Ramchander then was in the British camp, and the job he was given was to translate the news reports that used to come from the city, because the British had their informers inside the city who used to periodically send them information. So they used to get these letters and little notes written in Urdu, and Ramchander was the one who translated them into English so that the British officials could read them. In September, the British reconquered Delhi, and Ramchander was, of course, part of the British camp. He then was given new duties. A lot of papers had been gathered up, particularly in the Red Fort, once the Mughals and the soldiers had evacuated the place. A lot of the papers, the documents that were got, Ramchander was given the job of translating them. So his translation project really continued through the revolt of 1857 also. And he was given the job of translating these, getting these together. And he put all these reports together. He was actually quite disappointed, not in his work, but in the changed atmosphere that he saw around him. Because what he discovered was that suddenly all Indians, not only he, but all Indians in Delhi were the butt of racist attacks. And he wrote to his superior officials saying that how, even walking down the street, there were these British soldiers who used to insult them, who used to hit them. And he was extremely disappointed by that. And it kind of shook his faith in what he had initially felt was a British fair play, at least to some extent. But he was very, very disappointed in that. And then he in fact left Delhi for a little while. He got a job in the engineering college in Roorkee, the Thomason College in Roorkee. He went off there for and got a job there. He taught there for a little while, but I think it was the pull of Delhi that eventually brought him back again. And he came back. He came back to Delhi in a few months. I think he just stayed there for 8 or 9 months in Roorkee, and he came back. He got a job now as a teacher in a headmaster and maths teacher in the school. There was a government school. The Delhi College, of course, had at that point was under a bit of a cloud, had closed down for a while, but he started teaching in the school in Delhi. His health had never been very good, so in 1866 he retired from his teaching job when he was just 45. He just hung on long enough so that he became eligible for his pension, and he retired at the age of 45 in 1866. He was, even in this period, he was quite active in some of the public fora which were there in Delhi. One was the Delhi Society, which used to meet from time to time in the town hall, and it included other literary and intellectual figures, even like Mirza Ghalib, and they used to discuss things like science, social reform, etc. After a while, but of course after the days of Ramchander, after a while it became more questioning about political issues also. They started questioning in a few years later. But Ramchander was also, after his retirement from government service for a while, was appointed as the tutor of the Maharaja of Patiala, Mohinder Singh. And he went and he taught him there, the young boy. He was a young boy before his accession, and he was a young boy, and he taught him and became very well liked there as well. And when Mohinder Singh succeeded to the throne, he made him the director of education. So some of the earliest reforms in the Patiala state in the educational field were under the guidance of Ramchander. So that was one of his major contributions in the educational sphere as well, apart from all his other all the other contributions earlier. He continued to live. Then after that, he lived in Delhi only most of the time, I think. And as I said, he was never very robust in health, and in 1881, at the age of 59, he died. But he has left behind a legacy which unfortunately I think we did not take far enough, because his whole idea behind his program was that people learn best if they are taught in their mother tongue. And of course, the whole idea that a scientific temperament, rationality, you need to question, you need to scientific methods of proof have to be the foundation of your learning experience. You cannot learn in a parrot fashion. You have to understand, it's not blind faith. You have to through demonstration, through proof, rational proof, you have to understand something. That idea, and of course the idea that you should study in your mother tongue, that was not taken far enough. Very soon the focus shifted to studying through the English language, and So that and the whole idea of a general public which is very aware of modern methods, of modern scientific proof, or modern scientific developments, I think that did not get taken as far as Ramchander would have liked, and that is, we have forgotten his legacy, but that is something that he was very close to his heart, and he would have liked to see that go further. So I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you very much for joining me.